Inc., the business of Shaquille O'Neal. And so I just recently interviewed him, and I actually asked him about Caitlin Clark, and he had an interesting take on it, which he said the tension in the league right now is not racially motivated tension. It's not political tension. It's a rite of passage that she is going to be the face of the league, but the existing veteran players are not going to let her until she basically goes through this on the court hazing ritual.
Shock is not that this game got heated, it is what happened after the whistle. One brutal collision involving Sophie Cuningham and Dijonai Carington suddenly turned the WNBA into a courtroom. Shaq O'Neal weighed in, and Caitlin Clark somehow ended up at the center of the storm. But here is where this story gets wild. Was this simply basketball getting physical, or did the officials make a decision that could change the entire conversation? And once you see what happened next, you'll understand why everyone started asking questions.
Me take a walk with me, take a walk with me. There is craziness going on in the WNBA. Dijonai Carington tweeted out white privilege from the locker room of a game that she was playing in. Get this. She fouled Sophie Cuningham hard. Sophie Cuningham, obviously a white person, fouls her hard. Flagrant 2, gets ejected, goes to the locker room and tweets out white privilege in the middle of the game. Now here's the kicker to me. A flagrant 2 has to be contact that can lead to an injury that looks excessive. Dijonai, it was about as excessive as possible. If there was any evidence of there being white privilege, this was not it. What
the game had already turned physical, but then Dijonai Carington took things to a completely different level. Sophie Cuningham was making her way through the play when Carington caught her with a collision that immediately had everybody in the building reacting.
For a layup, and so I don't oppose the hard foul, but I also don't think that she intentionally went for the net.
Stephanie White, we shouldn't be surprised. This is somebody who has come out and admitted publicly that she's uneducated on the difference between male and female. She's uneducated on. So are we really surprised that this is Stephanie White's thought process here? I've been saying Steph needs to be fired for over a year. The reason she never defends Caitlin is because she agrees with the rough play. In fact, she taught Dijonai and AT how to play this way.
She was watching the replay. It looked far more serious than an ordinary basketball play, with the contact around Cunningham's upper body making the moment especially jarring. And somehow, the hit itself was only the beginning. Because while fans were waiting to see whether Cunningham's own team would immediately rally around her, another part of the story started raising eyebrows.
Felt that Caitlin put a little extra sauce on the forearm when she ran into that official. Did the league get this right, rescinding the technical foul?
Can we see it again? Team crew in the control room, can I see it again? Because you all watched this in real time.
Yeah.
You all watched this happen in real time. I was surprised that a technical foul was called.
And it did, because for that action being minimal, like a brush, this is what should have happened and the right thing happened. What? Like, what is
all I'm saying is I have flashbacks to college when my teammate bumped into a coach like this and it was a problem.
Where your teammate did what?
Bumped into one of our coaches this way and it was a problem. But I think when we analyze it, if Caitlin didn't say anything, it is marginal. I think rescinding it was fine. But I do understand in the moment how we got
Stephanie White did not exactly storm onto the court in the kind of dramatic show of support people might have expected. And suddenly, the conversation shifted from what happened between the players to how the team handled what happened.
Cunningham was going to be the next target. I've been telling you guys for weeks. Sophie would take the role of Caitlin Clark as public enemy number 1 in the WNBA dump. And yesterday was the first attack. You know, I wasn't able to predict this because I'm some brilliant scholar or philosopher. This prediction was not delivered to me in a dream or a vision that came from the dearly departed Miss Cleveland's
reaction made the situation even more fascinating. Instead of looking like someone who had just committed an obvious flagrant foul, Carington appeared to have a very different interpretation of the entire incident. Her comments afterward only added fuel to the fire, because the way she discussed the play made some fans wonder whether she genuinely believed the contact was just part of normal basketball. And that is where this story gets interesting. Because if the collision was already controversial, the explanation afterward turned it into something much bigger. Fans were no longer debating just one foul. They were debating intent, accountability, officiating, and whether certain players are treated differently when the temperature of a WNBA game suddenly goes through the roof. And then, if Dijonai Carington was ejected from the game. From that point on, everything escalated. Sophie Cuningham had already taken the brunt of the contact and hit the floor hard, and she immediately got up and moved toward Carington before teammates and Fever security stepped in to separate them. Carington then made her way toward the tunnel, as the crowd reaction only intensified the moment.
Take this play successfully, right? Trying to get a block over the top. It was a very hard foul. Dijonai has made this play successfully so many times throughout her career. No matter what team she has played on, we have seen Dijonai make transition blocks.
Right.
So to me, I understand it was called a flagrant 2. I wouldn't have been mad if it was called a flagrant 1 because I do think she was making a basketball play.
Most explosive part of the night didn't happen in the arena at all. It happened online. Only minutes after the ejection, Carington posted the words "white privilege" and tagged the Indiana Fever. The transcript places the post roughly 8 minutes after the foul, while the game was still ongoing. And just like that, the entire conversation changed. Because now it wasn't just about a hard foul anymore. It was about intent, interpretation, and everything surrounding it. And that is where the situation stopped being a normal basketball controversy and turned into something much bigger than one play. Several of them publicly defended Sophie Cuningham, pointing out that what she experienced was not unusual contact for a competitive game, but the reaction and escalation around it felt disproportionate. Others defended Dijonai Carington, arguing that physical defense is part of the game and that emotional reactions after ejections are not new. But the most consistent theme from NBA voices was not about taking sides. It was about officiating. A growing number of players began saying the same thing in different ways. The standard is not consistent. They pointed out that similar plays in the NBA often result in common fouls or flagrant ones, depending on context. But in the WNBA, the interpretation seems to swing wildly from game to game. That inconsistency, they argued, is what creates frustration and eventually public blowups.
Since foul was upgraded to a flagrant 2 on Sophie Cuningham, she was ultimately ejected from the game against the Indiana Fever. Then she takes her to the locker room, and the first thing she does is run to Twitter and say, "White privilege." Where's the white privilege in this? So I'm watching the game, Sophie Cuningham going on a fast break. And again, Dijonai Carington, you're not going for the ball. You literally went straight for her cranium. So I don't know why you see her screaming white privilege after that. Don't deflect from the malicious, the blatant, and overly aggressive foul that you just created. That again, if the WNBA does not suspend you for multiple games,
NBA veterans even went further, saying that players like Cunningham and Carington are being put in impossible situations where physical defense is encouraged until it suddenly becomes punishable without clear explanation. That sentiment spread quickly, especially among players who have watched the WNBA grow in visibility over the last 2 seasons. And then the conversation took another turn when older controversies were brought back into the spotlight. One of the most shocking talking points that resurfaced online was the suspension involving Caitlin Clark, which fans and commentators referenced as part of a broader pattern of officiating confusion. According to the discussion circulating in the transcript's context, Clark was suspended after an incident where she allegedly pushed a referee during a heated moment in a game. The reaction to that suspension was immediate and divided. For critics, it was a clear line that should never be crossed, regardless of context. And now, with the Carington-Cunningham incident unfolding, those old debates came rushing back. NBA players who had already been speaking about officiating fairness began connecting the dots publicly. The result is a league where every hard foul becomes a referendum on fairness, and that is exactly what happened here. Sophie Cunningham's supporters argue she was simply playing aggressive basketball and got caught in a moment that escalated beyond control. Dijonai Carington's supporters argue she was responding emotionally to a physical play and a hostile environment, and that her post reflected frustration rather than intent to.
And I saw this coming is because I have been seeing this same thing in this toxic turd of a league for years. As I am watching the reactions on social media yesterday of Dijonai Carington assaulting Sophie Cuningham, and that's what this was. Assault. This was not incidental contact in the rhythm of a basketball game, mainly because the WNBA is not a basketball league. What you saw yesterday, that was intentional assault.
And voices stepping into the conversation changed the tone again. Because when players who have spent years dealing with playoff-level physicality start saying, "This doesn't look consistent," people listen differently. Some of them specifically mentioned that the WNBA is in a transition period where increased popularity, especially around stars like Caitlin Clark, has amplified every single decision made by officials. That spotlight, they argue, is exposing flaws that were always there but never scrutinized at this level. And that is where the outrage is coming from now. Not just from one fan base or one team, but from a growing cross-section of players, analysts, and former professionals. And Cunningham's involvement ties it all together because she sits at the center of the most recent flashpoint. What makes the next chapter even more important is that the league now has to deal with the consequences of a controversy that has already escaped the boundaries of the court. The officials made their ruling during the game, but once social media entered the picture, the WNBA was no longer dealing with a simple officiating decision. It was dealing with competing interpretations of intent, fairness, identity, and accountability, all of which can become much harder to control once millions of fans have chosen.
Fever games, like, I don't know if I love them or I hate them at times. It's like, if you like anything about reality TV, then the WNBA is, and sports, then the WNBA is for you. Sometimes it gets to be way too much. And this season, I gotta say, I've gotten to that place multiple times. But this game, like, I mean, love it or hate it, you can't say that you could have taken your eyes off of it for any second. The Indiana Fever came in against the Chicago Sky, playing on their home turf. And listen, the Chicago Sky have been a very bad team, but have also taken teams to the wire, like the Minnesota Lynx, nearly beating them.
Is where the league faces its biggest challenge, because consistency cannot simply mean making the same call after something goes wrong. It means establishing a standard that players, coaches, and fans can understand before the next controversial play happens. If a particular type of contact is going to result in an ejection, players need to know why. And if similar contact in another game produces a different result, the league needs to be able to explain that difference without leaving everyone to fill in the blanks themselves. The timing also matters because the WNBA is operating in an era where almost every major officiating more difficult. Because a referee is no longer making a decision that exists only inside an arena. The decision can become the centerpiece of a national argument before the players have even reached the locker room. That is precisely why the league cannot afford to treat controversies like this as isolated incidents that simply disappear once the next game begins. If players and fans believe there is a pattern of inconsistent enforcement, every future decision will be judged against that perception. A referee could make the correct call and still face criticism because the audience remembers a different call from weeks or years earlier. In that environment, trust becomes much harder to rebuild than it is to lose.
The WNBA, there's a video of SHAQ going around talking about the WNBA. He goes,
I have a way to make it equal.
The WNBA, they have all the pieces to have a really good league. They have shooters, they have ball handlers, they have finesse. There's no...
We just lower the rim so y'all can like
we put butts in the seat.
No.
I don't think that's the problem. That's what Shaq said. He's thinking basketball. He's not thinking why people want to watch shit. Yeah. You're a jiu-jitsu guy, right? Yeah. The good thing is women's jiu-jitsu, it's actually popping, but like, let's say it wasn't. From a jiu-jitsu lens, you'd probably be like, oh yeah, if there's fucking more arm breaks, people are going to...
Situation also exposes the complicated relationship between competitive intensity and responsibility. Players are expected to defend aggressively, protect their teammates, challenge shots, and compete for every possession. But they are also expected to understand when physicality has crossed the line. That balance has always existed in basketball, although the enormous attention surrounding the modern WNBA means every controversial decision now receives far more scrutiny than it once did. And that scrutiny is not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, it can force leagues to become more transparent and more consistent. The problem begins when the conversation stops being about what actually happened and becomes entirely about what people believe happened. Once that happens, facts can become secondary to narratives, and every new replay simply becomes another weapon in, and most importantly, the fans know it. A routine defensive play that would normally receive a few seconds of attention could suddenly become the next major talking point if it involves the same players. That does not mean the players should avoid competing aggressively, because that would defeat the purpose of professional basketball. It means the league has to make sure the rules are applied clearly enough that competition does not become overshadowed.
Can't even say again because Caitlin finally pulled some rank around here, right? Caitlin, I wouldn't even say Caitlin Clark really pulled rank. I feel like her influence and her power alone dictated this action without her even having to lift a finger. I mean, getting suspended for literally being pushed into a referee might be the worst technical foul I've ever seen. And it's up there with Tim Duncan's technical foul. is up there with it. But anyways, Caitlin Clark's technical foul, her 8th technical foul, which would have suspended her, which would have disqualified her from playing against the New York Liberty in Indiana on ESPN. Her 8th technical foul.
Also a lesson here for the players themselves. Social media gives athletes an unprecedented ability to speak directly to their audiences, but that power comes with consequences because anything posted during an emotionally charged moment can become part of the controversy itself. A reaction that feels temporary to the person writing it can remain online long after the emotions of the game have disappeared. That is why the aftermath can sometimes become more damaging than the original incident. The whistle ends the play, but the internet keeps the play alive. The officials can review the footage, make a decision, and move on, while fans continue replaying the moment from different angles and debating what they believe it proves. At that point, the league is no longer controlling the conversation because the conversation has taken on a life of its own. For the WNBA, controversies can remain part of the competitive drama without becoming permanent crises of credibility. Because ultimately, the issue is not whether professional basketball should be physical. It absolutely should be. The issue is whether everyone involved understands where competitive physicality ends and unacceptable contact begins.
Either way, Dijonai Carington came in and did not make the game boring at all. She hard fouled Sophie Cuningham in transition. Absolutely a flagrant 2. Just look at the way that Sophie Cuningham goes down. Dangerous, reckless, not okay. And what makes matters worse is Dijonai Carington goes to Threads and she posts white privilege, tagging the Indiana Fever. Now, I gotta say, this is something I just can't get down with anymore. Like, the whole divisiveness of an issue that has nothing to do with...
Distinction matters even more when the players involved already carry enormous public attention. Caitlin Clark's presence has dramatically increased scrutiny around the Fever, while players such as Dijonai Carington and Sophie Cuningham have become recognizable figures in their own right. Every confrontation involving highly visible players therefore has the potential to become much larger than the possession itself. That is why this controversy will probably not be remembered simply as a flagrant 2 foul in an Indiana victory. It will be remembered as another moment when what it needs is a standard that remains understandable when the cameras are everywhere, the fan bases are divided, and social media is waiting for the next controversial clip. Because the next chapter will not be determined by what happened during this game alone. It will be determined by what the league, the players, and the fans do with what happened afterward. And when these teams meet again, everyone will be watching for more than the final score. They will be watching to see whether the controversy changed anything, whether the intensity remains competitive without becoming personal, and whether the league can finally convince everyone that the same standard applies regardless of who is standing in front of the officials. That is the real test waiting ahead, because one controversial game can create headlines, but only consistent decisions can prevent those headlines from becoming a pattern.